Okay, so you're renting a place and things get,
Uh,
well, complicated, right?
mhm.
We've all heard those eviction horror stories, and it's enough to make anyone anxious.
Yeah, it can be a really stressful situation. Feeling like you might lose your home, that's not something anyone wants to deal with.
Exactly. And that's why we're diving deep today into evictions, especially for tenants, to empower you guys. We're calling this one, How to Win Your Eviction Case as a Tenant. Because, honestly, knowing your rights and how the whole legal side works, that can make a huge difference.
Absolutely. It's all about taking away that feeling of helplessness. When you understand the process, you can actually start to feel a bit more in control, even though it's a tough situation.
Right. And the thing is, eviction laws, they can be kind of tricky. They vary from place to place. But the good news is there are these core strategies and principles that can help pretty much any tenant facing this. So today we're going to break those down, from a legal perspective. Like, what does a landlord actually have to prove to evict someone? And more importantly, how can you build a strong defense?
And what's super interesting is that even though the exact rules might change depending on where you live, the basic legal ideas behind an eviction case, those tend to be pretty similar across the board. And grasping those can really give you an edge if you're ever in that position.
I see. So it's like understanding the game, even if the rules get tweaked a bit. Okay, so let's start with the landlord side of things, right? Like, what's their playbook?
We actually got some insights from this landlord attorney in Texas, Ernie Garcia, and he laid out these 4 main things a landlord usually has to show in court. First up, the agreement itself.
Yep, that's the foundation, right? Garcia says the landlord's got to prove there was actually a lease agreement with the tenant. Now, usually it's written down, that makes it easy, but it could also be a verbal agreement, spoken. The key is that both sides agreed. You, the tenant, get to live there, and in return, you give something of value, like it's a trade-off. Lawyers call this consideration basically what each side gets out of the deal. And that something doesn't always have to be money, right? Like Garcia mentioned, even taking care of the property, like gardening, that could count as part of the agreement.
Exactly. The heart of it is that exchange. You get to live there, and the landlord gets something in return, whether it's rent or help maintaining the place. If they can't even prove that basic agreement, their case is already weak.
Makes sense. So agreement check. Next, Garcia says the landlord has to prove you broke that agreement, like you violated the terms somehow. What did he say is the most common example?
Not paying rent, that's the big one. If the lease clearly says how much you owe and when it's due and you miss those payments, well, that's a pretty clear violation. But of course, there could be other stuff that counts as a breach depending on what your specific lease says.
Gotcha. So we've got the agreement, the alleged breach. Now things get interesting. The third thing Garcia talked about is proper notice, and this sounds like it's super important for tenants to pay attention to.
Oh, absolutely. This is where things can get tricky for landlords, even if they have a good case on the agreement and the breach. Garcia was very clear. They have to prove they gave you, the tenant, a proper, legally sound notice to vacate. Like in Texas, it's usually this written 3-day notice. It's all about procedure.
So even if the landlord has a reason, they can't just kick someone out on a whim.
Nope, not at all. They have to follow the rules. And get this, Garcia said, even if everything else is solid, if they mess up the notice, like the timing is off or they don't deliver it right, the whole eviction case can fall apart. Like, it doesn't even matter why they're trying to evict you. It shows how much the law cares about fairness in the process.
That's really interesting. And this notice has to be given the right way to everyone on the lease, right?
Right. All tenants named on that lease have to be properly served. It's a pretty significant detail that can really trip up a landlord's case. It's a good reminder for tenants that even small procedural errors can have big consequences.
Okay, so agreement breach notice.
Yeah.
What was that fourth element Garcia mentioned?
Damages. But he was quick to point out that there are limits on what landlords can actually recover in an eviction case, at least in Texas. They can usually only go after unpaid rent that's piled up until the trial date, plus things like court costs, and even attorney fees. Those are only allowed if the lease specifically says so or if they gave you a special 10-day notice before going to court.
So that means stuff like late fees, unpaid utilities, damage to the property, all that's separate.
Exactly. Garcia's point was, an eviction lawsuit is about getting the property back. Any other money issues, they have to be dealt with in a different case. He even told landlords to stick to those 4 main points. Keep it simple. Don't muddy the waters with extra stuff that doesn't directly relate to getting the property back.
That's actually helpful to know, even for tenants. It clarifies what's at stake in that initial eviction hearing. So you've got a good picture of how landlords approach this. Now, let's flip it and talk about you, the tenant. If you get hit with an eviction notice, how can you start building your defense? We're going to look at some general ideas, but we'll also focus on California since that's where we're based.
All right, so first things first. You get that eviction notice. Don't panic, but don't ignore it either. Examine it carefully. Does it have all the required info based on your local laws? Was it delivered properly and on time? What exact reason are they giving for evicting you? Understanding that notice inside and out, that's your starting point.
Okay, so break down the notice. What else is essential?
Your lease agreement and your local laws. Those are your weapons, essentially. Your lease, it lays out all the terms, your rights, the landlord's responsibilities, all that. And then you've got your local laws, which in places like California, they can be pretty strong for tenants. Things like rent control or just cause eviction rules, those can limit what a landlord can even try to evict you for.
So basically, know your rights.
Exactly. And look for anything the landlord might have done wrong. Did they violate the lease? Did they break any local tenant protection laws? That knowledge can be really powerful.
Makes sense. So you've got the notice figured out, you've reviewed your lease, you know your rights. What's next?
Gather your evidence, every scrap of it. This is where a good defense really comes together.
Okay, so what kind of evidence are we talking about here?
We'll start with your lease, of course, the original signed copy, and any changes made later, those are crucial. Then, any proof you have of paying rent. Rent receipts, canceled checks, bank statements, all that. Basically, anything that shows you paid. And keep any communication with your landlord, emails, texts, letters, even notes you made after talking on the phone. Especially if it's about repairs you asked for or complaints you made, that stuff can be gold.
What about things like, photos or videos?
Oh, those can be super helpful, especially if you're arguing the place was unlivable, bad conditions, or if you need to prove you were following the lease rules. Visual proof is strong. You can even get statements from neighbors who saw stuff, as witnesses.
So it's like building a case, piece by piece.
Exactly. The more solid evidence you have, the stronger your position. It's not just your word against theirs anymore.
Right. Okay, so you've got your evidence. What are some of the common ways tenants can fight back in an eviction case? We've already touched on one, and it sounds like a big one. Improper notice.
Yeah, if the landlord messed up that notice like we talked about, didn't give you enough time, didn't send it the right way, that can be a strong defense. If they didn't follow the rules, the whole eviction could be thrown out.
And what about situations where the landlord themselves isn't holding up their end of the bargain? Like, what if the place is basically unlivable?
That's a big one. Landlords have a legal...
Okay, what about situations where a landlord is being, vindictive, like trying to evict someone because they complained about something?
That's called retaliatory eviction, and it's illegal in many places. Landlords can't punish you for standing up for your rights. So let's say you reported them for code violations or requested repairs, and then bam, they hit you with an eviction notice. That timing, that can be a strong sign of retaliation, and you can use that to fight back.
And sadly, sometimes eviction can be about discrimination, right?
Unfortunately, yes. If you think you're being evicted because of your race, religion, disability, family status, or anything else protected under fair housing laws, that's a serious violation and a strong defense. You absolutely have the right to fight that.
It's a good reminder that eviction isn't always straightforward. There can be a lot of factors at play. Now, I know you mentioned California has some pretty strong tenant protections. What's this thing about wrongful eviction?
In California, wrongful eviction is basically any attempt to remove a tenant that doesn't follow the state's laws to the letter. It's not just about why they're evicting you, but also how they're going about it.
So even if they have a reason, they can still mess it up procedurally.
Yeah, and that can make the eviction wrongful. California has some pretty specific rules, and landlords have to follow them exactly, like changing locks without proper notice. That's a big no-no. Same with shutting off utilities as a way to force you out. That's illegal.
What about those situations where a landlord just lets the place fall apart, hoping you'll leave on your own?
That's called constructive eviction, and it's definitely a form of wrongful eviction in California. If the place becomes so bad that you're basically forced to move out, that's on them, even if they didn't physically evict you. And of course, any mistakes with those notices, like not giving enough time or not delivering them right, that can also make the eviction wrongful.
So basically, California landlords have to be extra careful with the process. They can't just wing it.
Exactly. There are a lot of hoops to jump through, and if they miss one, it can be a big problem for them. That's why it's so important for tenants to know their rights, especially in California.
All this just emphasizes how complex eviction can be, right? So if someone finds themselves in this situation, what's the most important thing they should do?
Get a lawyer, hands down. The moment you get that notice, or even if you just suspect it's coming, talk to a tenant rights attorney or a legal aid organization. Early legal help can be a game changer. Like for folks in Orange County, Riverside, San Diego, Los Angeles, you can find info and help at martinezlawcenter.com.
martinezlawcenter.com. Got it. This all reminds me of a story, a hypothetical scenario, but it really illustrates what we've been talking about. It's about this single dad in San Francisco, and he gets this new landlord who's just a nightmare.
Yeah, sadly, that's a common scenario. New landlord comes in, wants to get rid of the old tenants for whatever reason. In this case, the landlord was ignoring repairs, the place was getting run down, and he even made some discriminatory comments towards the tenant.
Ugh, that's awful. And to make things worse, the tenant joined this tenants' rights group, trying to learn about his rights, and boom, he gets slapped with an eviction notice.
Classic retaliation. But here's the good part. This tenant, he was smart. He documented everything, the ignored repairs, the discriminatory remarks, the timing of the notice, and he got legal help.
So he fought back, armed with evidence and a lawyer.
Exactly. And guess what? He won. The court saw what was going on, recognized that retaliatory eviction, and sided with the tenant. Not only did they stop the eviction, but the landlord had to make those repairs and pay the tenant's legal fees.
Wow, that's a huge win. It really shows that tenants can come out on top, especially if they know what they're doing.
It's a perfect example of how important it is to be proactive, to document everything, and to get legal help early on. Don't just assume you're going to lose.
So as we wrap up, let's give our listeners some key takeaways. What are the most important things to remember if you're facing eviction, or even if you just want to be prepared?
Okay, here's the cheat sheet. 1, you have rights as a tenant. Don't forget that.
Oh.
2, that eviction notice. Take it seriously, read it carefully, and act fast. There are deadlines. 3, document everything. Every interaction, every problem, every repair request. Take pictures, videos, keep records. 4, know your local laws and your rights under your lease. 5, don't hesitate to get legal help, the sooner the better. 6, think about whether talking it out with your landlord directly might work. Sometimes that's an option. And finally, be a good tenant. Pay your rent on time, communicate clearly, take care of the place. That can help prevent problems in the first place.
This has been a really eye-opening deep dive. Eviction is a scary topic, but knowing your rights and being proactive, that can make all the difference.
Absolutely. Understanding how the process works, both from the landlord side and the tenant side, that's empowering. And like we've been saying, local laws can vary, so definitely look into what applies in your specific area. And for those of you in those California counties, remember you can find more info at martinezlawcenter.com.
Great advice. And here's a final thought to leave you with. Knowing your rights as a tenant, it's not just about avoiding eviction. It's about making sure the whole process is fair, that everyone plays by the rules. So what steps are you going to take today to learn more about your rights, just in case you ever need that knowledge?
Call now 714-442-9741. Thank you.